What if one reckless moment could rewrite your entire future? Klara Ranger never thought a runaway food cart and a rain-slicked street would crash her into the life of Alec Vanderson, a man whose fortune was as vast as the walls he built around his heart. All she had was a dream stitched together by hope, and all he had was a life full of emptiness he never dared to question until she collided with it. Some accidents aren't accidents at all, they're the beginning of everything. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The rain had started hours ago, but Klara's day had unraveled long before the first drop hit the pavement. Balancing her tiny cupcake stand under a soak tarp that flapped uselessly in the wind, she fought the losing battle of saving her last few trays from drowning. She wiped rain from her forehead with the sleeve of her pink apron, her sneakers slipping slightly on the slick sidewalk. Another day of barely scraping by, another day of wondering if it was all worth it. The city roared around her, cars honking impatiently, umbrellas colliding in the crowded crosswalks, people rushing past without so much as a glance. No one cared about a girl selling cupcakes on the corner of 7th and Pine, and why should they? She was invisible. A speck. Another dreamer trying not to drown. Klara gritted her teeth and adjusted the strap on her cart, determined to push it back into storage before the wheels fell off entirely. The bakery she rented it from would deduct the damages from her pay, not that there was much left to deduct. Hold together, she muttered under her breath, giving the wheel a frustrated kick. It didn't. With a groan, the left wheel twisted sharply, catching on the uneven curb, and before she could stop it, the entire cart lurched forward, her precious cupcakes sliding dangerously toward the edge. No, 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 Klara cried, sprinting after it. But the rain-slicked street was unforgiving. Her shoes lost traction, and she stumbled after the runaway cart as it careened downhill directly into a sleek, black Aston Martin idling at the intersection. The sickening thud echoed louder than any car horn. Klara's heart dropped straight to her soaked sneakers. For a moment, time froze. The cart stood tilted awkwardly against the luxury car's gleaming side panel, one wheel still spinning. A bright pink frosted cupcake slid down the hood in slow motion, leaving a trail of cheery destruction behind it. Klara stood there, dripping, mortified, half expecting lightning to strike her down for good measure. The driver's door swung open. A man stepped out, tall and furious, his tailored charcoal gray suit somehow still pristine despite the downpour. His dark hair was damp but perfectly tousled, like he'd stepped out of a magazine shoot rather than a disaster zone. His jaw tightened as he surveyed the damage, cold blue-gray eyes finally landing on her. Klara swallowed hard, her voice trapped somewhere between her ribs and her throat. I'm so sorry, she blurted out, rushing forward. Her apron was splattered with frosting. Her hair clung to her face in limp, wet strands. I didn't mean to. The cart. It slipped, the rain. The man said nothing. He crouched to inspect the dent, running his thumb along the deep scratch marring the sleek paintwork. Klara felt her stomach knot tighter with every second of silence. Her cheeks burned despite the freezing rain. I'll pay for it, she burst out desperately, knowing full well she couldn't even afford a taxi ride right now, let alone repairs on a car that probably cost more than her entire existence. Still silent, he straightened up, towering over her. His face was unreadable, carved from stone, but there was something, a flicker, in his eyes. Not rage, not contempt, something far more dangerous. Curiosity. Your name, he said, his voice low and clipped. Klara blinked. What? Your name, he repeated, slower this time. Rain trickled down the sharp line of his jaw, and somehow he made even fury look elegant. Klara Ranger, she stammered. A small muscle ticked in his jaw. Follow me. Before she could protest, he turned sharply on his heel and strode toward the building beside the intersection, a towering structure of glass and steel that she vaguely recognized as Vanderson Holdings. Wait, Vanderson? As in Alec Vanderson? The notoriously private CEO? The man whispered about in business magazines, whose face graced the occasional headline alongside words like billionaire, reclusive, and untouchable? Klara's breath caught. Of all the cars in all the city, she had to crash into his. For a moment, her legs refused to move. She could run, bolt into the rain, vanish into the alleys where men like him wouldn't bother chasing. But somewhere deep inside her, somewhere beneath the fear and humiliation, burned a spark of stubbornness. She squared her shoulders, grabbed the ruined cart's handle, and trudged after him. The building's lobby swallowed her whole, marble floors, towering pillars, a chandelier that probably cost more than her life savings. She left soggy footprints in her wake, earning glares from the immaculate security guards as she pushed the sorry excuse for a cart across the gleaming tiles. Alec, because there was no mistaking him now, didn't look back once. He led her to a private elevator, swiped a card across the panel, and stepped inside. Klara hesitated on the threshold, the dripping remains of her dignity clinging to her apron. He turned his head, one brow arching in silent command. With a resigned sigh, she shoved the cart aside and stepped in after him. The doors slid closed with a soft hiss, sealing her fate. The elevator ascended in silence, the hum of the machinery the only sound between them. Klara kept her gaze fixed on the gleaming doors, her reflection a miserable smear of pink, mud, and tangled hair. She could feel Alec's presence beside her, a wall of silent authority that seemed to press against her chest, making it hard to breathe. When the doors finally slid open, she found herself stepping into an office unlike anything she'd ever seen. It wasn't just big, it was endless. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a rain-soaked skyline, the city's lights smeared across the glass like melted gold. Sleek furniture, cold and modern, dotted the open space, each piece more expensive-looking than the last. And at the very center, a massive desk made of dark polished wood, behind which Alec Vanderson moved with casual, terrifying grace. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a low chair across from his desk. Klara hesitated, dripping on the pristine floor, but one look at his expression told her arguing wasn't an option. She perched nervously on the edge of the chair, clutching the hem of her apron with white knuckles. Alec sat, steepling his fingers under his chin, studying her like a scientist examining a newly discovered species. "What exactly do you do?" he asked finally. Klara blinked. I sell cupcakes." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "Clearly." She flushed. "It's not much, but it's honest work. And this honest work led to the destruction of my property," he said, voice so dry she almost missed the hint of amusement lurking beneath it. She dropped her gaze, humiliation clawing at her throat. "I can't pay for it. Not right now. But if you give me time, I'll figure something out. I swear." Alec leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't need your money," he said. She looked up sharply. "Then why bring me here?" He tapped his fingers against the armrest, thoughtful. "Because," he said slowly, "it's not every day that someone has the nerve to crash into me and stand there soaked, shaking, and still too stubborn to run." Klara's cheeks flamed. "I didn't mean to," she mumbled. "I know." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then Alex stood abruptly, rounding the desk with swift, measured strides. He stopped in front of her, looking down with an expression she couldn't read. "I have a proposition," he said. Klara's stomach twisted. Nothing good ever started with those words. "I'm not that kind of girl," she said quickly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. Alex's brows snapped together in a frown. "That's not what I'm offering." Heat flooded her face. Of course it wasn't. What was she thinking? Men like him didn't need to prey on girls like her. They had entire worlds at their feet. "You need a job," he continued, voice curt. "And I need someone I can trust for a short-term project." "A project," she echoed. "You'll be assisting with an upcoming charity event my company is sponsoring," he said. "It's a logistical nightmare, vendors, deliveries, schedules. I need someone on-site who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty." She stared at him, uncomprehending. "Why me?" she blurted. Alex shrugged, the motion somehow elegant even in its casualness. "You're stubborn. You don't scare easily. And you're standing here instead of running." His gaze pinned her to the chair. "That tells me more about you than any resume ever could." Klara's heart thundered painfully in her chest. She opened her mouth to accept, to protest, she wasn't sure, but the words tangled on her tongue. "You'll be paid fairly," he added. "Enough to cover your rent for several months. Maybe more. Rent. Food. A chance." It dangled in front of her like a lifeline, and she was too tired, too battered by life to pretend she could afford to refuse. I'll do it," she whispered. Alec nodded once, crisp and businesslike. "Good. Be here tomorrow at 7 a.m. sharp." "Tomorrow," she squeaked. "Time waits for no one, Miss Ranger." And with that he turned away, dismissing her as effortlessly as if she were a file to be closed. Klara stumbled to her feet, still not quite believing what had just happened. She backed toward the elevator, bumping into the sleek glass door before she managed to find the handle. As the doors slid shut behind her, she caught one last glimpse of Alec Vanderson standing in the middle of his empire, a man carved from rain and steel and something far more dangerous. Hope. The morning broke gray and restless, a thick mist clinging to the city's skin like a second breath. Klara stood outside Vanderson Holdings, her apron gone, her one decent pair of black pants pressed as neatly as trembling hands could manage. The strap of her worn leather bag cut into her shoulder, but she barely felt it. Nerves had taken over everything else. The security guards gave her skeptical once-overs as she approached the lobby desk, clutching Alec's business card like a talisman. "I'm here for Mr. Vanderson," she said, trying to make her voice sound stronger than it felt. The man behind the counter raised an eyebrow but tapped something into his screen. After a long moment, he handed her a visitor badge. 32nd floor. The elevator ride felt endless. Every ding of passing floors hammered against her ribs. She caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, eyes wide, mouth too tight, hair pulled back into a nervous bun. She looked out of place. Like a trespasser. The doors slid open to a space that hummed with quiet, ruthless efficiency. People moved like clockwork, dressed in shades of navy and black and gray, their conversations clipped and hushed. Klara stepped onto the marble floor, her sneakers making small, shameful squeaks. A woman with severe red lipstick and a headset appeared seemingly out of thin air. "Klara Ranger?" she asked, her tone suggesting she very much doubted that was a real name. "Yes," Klara said, clutching her bag tighter. "Follow me." The woman led her through a maze of glass partitions and minimalist furniture, finally stopping at a smaller conference room with a stack of folders waiting neatly on the table. "Your schedule. Vendor contacts. Event logistics," she rattled off. "You'll be coordinating deliveries and setup at the gala venue. Mr. Vanderson expects daily progress reports. No excuses." Klara nodded mutely, overwhelmed just looking at the folders. "Someone will drive you to the site," the woman continued, already tapping at her tablet. "You'll be reporting to Mr. Vanderson directly." "Directly. No pressure." The driver, a stone-faced man who introduced himself only as Darren, whisked her across town to the gala venue, an old historic theater being transformed into a glittering wonderland for the event. Workers buzzed around with scaffolding, lighting rigs, boxes of flowers, and catering deliveries all swirling in chaotic symphony. Klara inhaled deeply. This was a different kind of storm, but somehow it felt like one she might actually survive. She threw herself into the work with a kind of desperate determination. She hauled boxes, checked vendor lists, double-checked deliveries, coordinated with florists who treated her like a cockroach and decorators who barely disguised their eye rolls. By the end of the first day, she was bone-weary, her hands covered in tiny paper cuts from unpacking endless shipments of supplies. But she had survived. No, she had managed. Just as she was gathering her notes into a battered binder, a shadow fell over the clipboard. She looked up straight into Alec Vanderson's unreadable gaze. "You didn't run," he said, voice low. Klara tightened her grip on the clipboard. "Was I supposed to?" His mouth twitched, the smallest ghost of amusement. "Most would have," he said. She shrugged, too tired to be anything but honest. Running doesn't fix anything. For a moment, he just watched her, that same unsettling intensity simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Good," he said finally. "You'll need that." And just like that, he walked away, disappearing into the controlled chaos of the construction site. Klara exhaled slowly, her chest tightening against the strange ache growing there. She wasn't sure when it had started, that sense of being seen. Not pitted. Not dismissed. Seen. It was dangerous. It was foolish. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't feel like an invisible speck in a world too big to notice her. And deep down, she knew if she wasn't careful, she could lose herself completely to it. The following days blurred into a relentless rhythm of movement and noise. Klara lived inside her checklist, vendors confirmed, deliveries logged, last-minute crises extinguished with grim determination. She barely slept, surviving on caffeine and stubbornness, her world shrinking to the boundaries of the gala preparations. And somehow, impossibly, Alec Vanderson kept showing up. Not hovering. Not micromanaging. But watching. He would appear without warning, standing at the edge of a crowded room, his presence a gravitational force Klara felt before she even saw him. Sometimes he asked sharp, precise questions. Sometimes he simply observed, his eyes narrowed as if trying to solve a puzzle she didn't know she presented. Every encounter left her shaken, buzzing with an energy she didn't understand. It all came to a head 3 nights before the gala. The rain returned with a vengeance, hammering against the ancient roof of the theater. Half the vendor shipments were delayed. The floral arrangements were waterlogged. Worse, the centerpiece chandelier, an intricate, priceless piece borrowed from a museum, arrived damaged. Klara stood in the center of the main hall, clutching a dripping clipboard. her chest squeezing tighter with every furious phone call and panicked staffers swirling around her. This was it. This was the moment she failed. The moment they realized she was a fraud who had no business being here, pretending she could hold the strings of an operation she barely understood. Her vision blurred. She sucked in a shaky breath, trying to force back the rising tide of helplessness. And then a warm hand closed gently around her wrist. She flinched, startled. Alec. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply guided her away from the chaos, steering her toward a shadowed alcove behind the stage curtains. His grip was firm but not painful, grounding in a way that made her throat ache. When they stopped, he released her slowly, his fingers lingering a fraction longer than necessary. "You're panicking," he said quietly. Klara swallowed, humiliated tears pricking her eyes. "I'm fine." He raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You're drowning," he corrected, his voice low and steady. "And you're too stubborn to admit it." She jerked her hand back, folding her arms tight across her chest. "I can handle it." Alec studied her for a long, heavy moment. "I know you can," he said finally, softer. "But you don't have to do it alone." The words hit harder than they should have, cracking something deep inside her. No one had ever said that before. Not really. Not like they meant it. Klara opened her mouth, struggling for air, for words, for something, anything that would patch over the rawness clawing at her insides. Instead, what came out was a whisper. "I'm so tired of fighting." For a second, just a second, the mask Alec wore so effortlessly slipped. His eyes darkened with something that looked dangerously close to understanding. Without thinking, he reached up and brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek. The gesture was shockingly tender, almost reverent. Klara froze, caught in the gravity of him. "Let me help," he said, voice rougher now, the words like a thread snapping between them. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This was madness. This was reckless. This was inevitable. She didn't step away when his hand settled lightly against her jaw. She didn't protest when he lowered his head. And when his lips brushed hers, tentative at first, as if giving her a chance to pull away, she leaned in without hesitation. The kiss was soft and searching, a question they both already knew the answer to. When they finally broke apart, Klara's head spun, her hands trembling. Alec rested his forehead lightly against hers. "This changes everything," he murmured. She squeezed her eyes shut. "I know." And she did. Because there was no going back now. No undoing the way her heart had just rewritten its own rules in a single stolen breath. The world beyond the curtains still roared with chaos. But in that small, stolen pocket of space, Klara Ranger realized she wasn't drowning anymore. She was falling. And Alec Vanderson was falling with her. The night of the gala arrived heavy with unspoken promises. The historic theater had been transformed into something out of a dream, glittering chandeliers, endless rows of velvet seats, a stage framed with golden arches and blooms cascading like frozen fireworks. Music floated through the marble corridors, a soft, sophisticated hum of strings and piano. Klara moved through the crowd like a ghost, clipboard in hand, headset crackling against her ear. She wore the simple black dress the planning team had provided, modest and professional, but Alec's gaze, when it found her across the room, made her feel like she was wearing a crown instead of clearance rack polyester. He hadn't touched her since that night behind the curtains. Hadn't kissed her again. Hadn't needed to. The connection thrummed between them now, invisible but undeniable, as real as the pulse hammering in her wrists. Klara pulled herself back to the present with a sharp breath. There was work to do, an army of donors to shepherd, program to keep moving, 1,000 tiny fires to extinguish. She was good at surviving chaos. She had learned from the best. By the time the opening speeches began, the theater was packed. The lobby buzzed with champagne and ambition, and Klara could almost believe she had pulled it off, until she heard the whisper. "That's her," someone murmured nearby. "The Cupcake Girl. His new project." The words sliced through the elegant atmosphere like a knife. Klara stiffened, her nails digging into the leather of her clipboard. Another voice, cruel and laughing, added he always did have a thing for charity cases. Heat rushed up her neck, shame and fury colliding inside her chest. She forced herself to breathe, forced herself to keep moving. She had known this would happen. She had prepared herself. Or so she thought. It wasn't the rumors that broke her. It was the look she caught on Alec's face across the room, unreadable, distant, walled off again as he spoke with a group of investors, his hand resting lightly on a woman's perfectly manicured shoulder. A woman who wasn't Klara. The floor shifted beneath her feet. Of course this was temporary. A moment of madness. A mistake. She didn't belong here. She never had. She turned away, blinking against the sting in her eyes, shoving her clipboard into an abandoned chair as she slipped through the crowded lobby. No one noticed her leaving. No one ever did. She pushed through the heavy front doors, the cool night air slapping her in the face like a reprimand. She had made a fool of herself. Again. She was halfway down the steps when she heard her name. Clara! The voice tore through the night, raw and unpolished. She froze. Alec. He was pushing through the crowd, ignoring the stares, the murmurs, the rising storm of scandal. Clara, wait, he said, breathless, reaching for her. She backed away, her chest heaving. You should go back inside, she said, her voice hollow. You have a reputation to protect. Alec laughed, short and bitter. What good is a reputation if it costs me everything real? She shook her head, the tears finally spilling over. This was a mistake. No, he said fiercely, stepping closer. No, it wasn't. People were watching now. Phones lifted. Cameras flashed. 1,000 gossip sites ready to devour them whole. And Alec Vanderson, billionaire, untouchable, controlled Alec, reached for her hand. Right there, in front of everyone. You crashed into my life, he said, his voice steady, cutting through the chaos. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. The crowd rippled, a collective gasp riding the breeze. Clara stared at him, trembling. You don't belong on the outside, Clara, Alec said, threading his fingers through hers. You belong with me. She shook her head helplessly, the world spinning too fast. I'm nobody, she whispered. He smiled then, real and raw and devastating. You're everything. The floodgates shattered. Clara surged forward, throwing her arms around his neck, and Alec caught her with a low, broken sound that seemed torn from somewhere deep inside. They kissed. Not a tentative brush of lips, not a secret stolen behind closed doors, but a full, desperate, claiming kiss in the middle of the marble steps, beneath the glittering eyes of the world. And for once, Clara didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them judge. Let them try to tear them apart. Because Alec Vanderson wasn't letting go. And neither was she. When they finally broke apart, breathless and battered but somehow whole, Alec rested his forehead against hers. Come home with me, he said again, softer this time, a vow instead of a plea. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep into her bones. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't fighting. She was choosing. She smiled through her tears and whispered, yes. And together, hand in hand, they disappeared into the night, two reckless souls who had collided by accident but chosen to stay by love.